Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another audio article from the Democratic Constitution podcast. Today's article is Proposition 50, A Race to the Bottom, in which I argue for a Democratic-Republican strategy in the face of gerrymandering. This article was originally published in Marxist Unity Group, or MUG's, Bulletin, Light and Air. Before I read the article, I want to mention that Daniel Lazaire will be discussing the Constitution during the next Democratic Constitution Zoom forum. George Van Cleef was the previous guest. Dan is the author of 3 books, The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. Dan has written several articles for the Democratic Constitution blog, Jacobin, and Permanent Revolution, and he's also appeared multiple times on the Democratic Constitution podcast. The event is on November 19th, and it's at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Folks can find the Zoom link on the Democratic Constitution blog by searching democraticconstitutionblog.substack.com. If you're already a blog member, there will be a blog post coming out today announcing this event. I also want to remind folks that the audio content we put out is published on YouTube, and leaving a positive review on YouTube, giving it a like, so on and so forth, sharing it is really appreciated. Leaving a positive review and sharing the content that comes out on all of our podcast apps is also really appreciated. Okay, on with the article. Proposition 50, A Race to the Bottom. A recent Jacobin article allowed me to indulge in a guilty pleasure, calling out the Democratic Party's hypocrisy and tarring it as Democratic in name only. It's almost too easy. Barack Obama bled out homeowners, bailed out the banks, and assassinated citizens by executive decree. Joe Manchin used the Senate to single-handedly kill the Build Back Better Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Fellow Democrat Kyrsten Sinema helped with the latter. Joe Biden shut down the border in a move called excruciating and likely deadly, flipped on D.C. statehood, and supported the genocide in Gaza. More recently, House Democrats thanked ICE for its service. Last month, it was good old Gavin Newsom, blue tie, hair slicked back with L'Oreal, arguing that Proposition 50 is urgently needed to push back on Trump's attempts to shred democracy and bring accountability to Trump's administration. The initiative, which would gerrymander California's congressional map for the next 2 elections, isn't another example of overt political corruption, Newsom argued. It's fighting fire with fire. Thanks to Newsom and the Democrats, we Californians supposedly have an opportunity to level the playing field and give power back to the people, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Take the responsible, smart, measured approach, says Barack Obama, and meet and balance Texas's outrageous power grab, says former Attorney General Eric Holder. For the umpteenth time, something called our democracy is supposedly hanging by a thread, and once again the Democrats claim they've come to the rescue. One might think that the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, looking to create some separation from the mainstream of the Democratic Party, with no ability to sway the outcome of the November 4th vote, and therefore in a perfect position to make a principled stand against gerrymandering, and with at least some institutional knowledge and historical memory of previous Democratic Party gimmicks, would want nothing to do with the Democratic initiative of 2025. That DSA might, in fact, use the Texas fallout and the Prop 50 hubbub to indict our undemocratic system, call out the Democrats' latest stunt, and agitate for what we actually need: nationwide multi-member districts with proportional representation. Instead, many California chapters have supported Newsom's move. California DSA, a council composed of delegates from chapters across the state, was the first to endorse it. The discussion on its website exemplifies 2 political tendencies within DSA. One seeks to downplay criticism of the Democratic Party in hopes of removing Republicans and electing DSA members or DSA-supported progressives. The other consistently condemns the Democratic Party and aims to build a working-class movement by calling for class struggle and a socialist revolution. The first tendency believes that the United States is sufficiently democratic to bring about meaningful change if the right people are in power. The second argues that issues of political equality are secondary to demands for a socialist economic system. The main flaw in both positions is the absence of the democratic republic, which serves as both a strategy for taking power and an ideology and programmatic demand around which an independent party can form. Two tendencies. The arguments put forward by Chris Cowthern, Fred Glass, and Mark Gaynor are examples of the first tendency. Cowthern argues that gerrymandering is the right's most powerful weapon for locking working people out of politics. In addition to taking the fight to the Republicans, he supports Prop 50 endorsement because it will supposedly help socialists agitate and push beyond the rigged two-party system and make demands for fundamental reform in California, like proportional representation, multi-member districts, and ranked choice voting. Finally, a gerrymandered map will help DSA by opening space for us to run our own members for Congress. Glass is not a fan of Newsom, but all is fair in love and war. For him, going all in on Prop 50 is a chance to build alliances with progressive forces and fight fascism, a threat far worse for the working class than working with the class-betraying Democratic Party. Nothing can be worse than fascism. It's a hard reality to accept, but to retain basic democratic rights, DSA must support the Democrats. To say otherwise shows a rigid belief in a party line combined with hallucinatory expectations for revolution around the corner. Gaynor reiterates many of the previous points. Opposing Prop 50 is equivalent to sitting on one's hands. A gerrymandered House map could allow DSA to elect more socialist sympathetic Democrats to Congress. Endorsement is part of a long-term strategy that will help us connect with the working class and build something called collective power. And no one likes Newsom, but a Republican-controlled House in 2026 means fascism. The arguments put forward by Andrew T. and Ian H. are emblematic of the second tendency. Both are skeptical of the supposed benefits of endorsement, support organizational independence, and recognize the Democratic Party's base is shrinking and demoralized. They want nothing to do with Newsom, use terms like capitalist politics versus socialist politics, and argue workers need an independent socialist party and a new kind of political system entirely, one in which workers control their workplaces, communities, and government directly. Less than convincing. Cowthern, Glass, and Gaynor are unconvincing. Cowthern mistakes the symptom for the disease. Gerrymandering isn't the central means by which the right locks workers out of politics. The constitutional order is. The Electoral College, where a few 100,000 voters in swing states choose the president, the malapportioned Senate, which underrepresents Californians and blocks progressive legislation, including gerrymandering reform itself, and the unelected Supreme Court, which has been striking down emancipatory projects since Reconstruction. This system is what disempowers working people, and the Democrats defend it just as fiercely as Republicans. Glass, meanwhile, thinks the only way to earn workers' attention is to tail labor unions. But that logic treats working people as if they could never be wrong or persuaded by an argument. At the same time, Glass argues workers outside of DSA won't stand in judgment of our actions anytime soon. By that logic, supporting an undemocratic ploy while representing a democratic socialist organization is an acceptable contradiction because no one is paying attention. I disagree. Workers are paying attention, and many are frustrated with the Democratic Party and our political system. We must talk directly to those people and win them to our ideas. It's our job to organize the advanced section of the working class, those who know the United States isn't a democracy, understand the Democratic Party is a dead end, and are ready to fight for change. Talking about democracy while supporting gerrymandering and Newsom only alienates the people we want in our organization. It's DSA's obligation to unite the working class and lead the democratic struggle against our oligarchic government, to be the vanguard fighters for democracy and wrest political and ideological leadership from the two-party duopoly. That project demands education through agitation and exposure. Workers need to understand how the ruling class operates. One section of the bourgeoisie makes appeals to the workers to further its own power struggles against other sections, just as the Democrats appeal to the masses against Trump in the name of democracy and protecting the Constitution. The bourgeoisie are opportunists who thrive on fear, confusion, and obfuscation. Creating a viable party for democracy and socialism demands honesty and clarity. We must take advantage of every opportunity, including those provided by sections of the ruling class in their own struggles for power, to foster a democratic socialist point of view through timely and all-sided political indictments. Agitating for proportional representation and an end to our oligarchic government in the face of Democratic and Republican Party gerrymandering schemes is one such opportunity. This perspective can teach workers to analyze how various institutions and laws reflect this or that interest, to quote Lenin, and recognize, again quoting Lenin, the catchwords and the sophisms by which each class and each stratum conceals its selfish desires and its actual essence. Like Glass, Gaynor warns us about fascism. But as with gerrymandering, the rise and persistence of right-wing authoritarianism is a symptom of the constitutional regime. Trump first entered the White House despite losing the popular vote. Once in office, his Supreme Court justices were confirmed by a Senate majority that represented a minority of Americans. In return, the Supreme Court has expanded Trump's already broad powers. Impeachment is the Constitution's final safeguard against a rogue president, and charges were twice leveled against Trump. Both times, the senators who voted for impeachment, 48 for abuse of power and 47 for obstruction of Congress in 2019, and 57 for incitement of insurrection in 2021, represented more Americans than those who voted against it. But the Senate represents states, not people, and it would have taken an unimaginable 67 votes to convict. Like his first campaign, Trump's second and third runs were fueled by fears, resentment, and disillusionment of a population ravaged by poor government policies, which originate in the Senate, where Republicans and Democrats have blocked efforts to expand voting rights, improve health care, restrict guns, protect the environment, raise the minimum wage, and advance many other issues favored by the left. Far from fighting fascism, the Democrats have allowed its growth by sticking to the constitutional system that created this crisis and keeps us stuck. And a point of clarity. Cawthorn argues chapters can support gerrymandering while advocating for more fundamental reforms in the state, including proportional representation, multi-member districts, ranked choice voting, and political pluralism. However, anyone hoping for a local solution has it wrong. Federal law prohibits states from implementing proportional representation for congressional districts. The changes we need must come from a national law applied universally, something consistently blocked in the Senate. To create a new national political system, we need a nationwide party united around a program for democracy. I'm also not convinced by Andrew and Ian. Socialism is too narrow an appeal to create a mass political movement in the United States. Agitation that centers on socialism while dismissing the struggle for proportional representation and political rights more broadly as a liberal assumption won't go very far. And their discussion of capitalist politics versus socialist politics tells us nothing about what kind of state the working class needs and, therefore, what concrete political demands DSA should be putting forward. What's missing? Contrary to Cawthorn, Glass, and Gaynor, the United States is not a democracy based on universal and equal suffrage. Contra Andrew and Ian, that absence is crucial. Missing from both tendencies is the demand for a democratic constitution that, paraphrasing DSA's Workers Deserve More program, establishes civil, political, and democratic rights for all, and is based on proportional representation in a single federal legislature. This is an orthodox Marxist position applicable in all countries lacking universal and equal suffrage. Marx, Engels, Lenin, Kautsky, Luxemburg, Debs. Everyone understood that to make inroads on capital and create a socialist economy and fend off threats from the far right, the working class needed to win the battle for democracy by achieving a democratic republic. The democratic republican strategy has a political component. Condemning the constitutional system explains how a capitalist minority dominates the majority and why Trump has been able to accumulate such immense power. Demanding a democratic alternative provides a concrete vision of the kind of state we need, one capable of placing the working class in command and clearly distinguishes us from the Democratic Party. It also has an ideological component. The strategy draws on the ideas and language of justice, equality, and universal rights, the animating values behind the country's greatest mass movements, from the Civil War and Reconstruction to the Civil Rights and anti-Vietnam War movements. You cannot allow the Democrats to co-opt these ideas. Socialists have always fought against every social injustice, and, in the words of Jean Jaurès, struggled to preserve the pitiful progress of humanity, the modest guarantees that the working class has little by little conquered through century-long efforts and a long series of revolutions. The Democratic Party's legitimacy and Newsom's growing stardom depend on playing Trump's foil by posing as defenders of democracy while crushing any dissent within their ranks. But the bourgeoisie has always hated democracy and fought tooth and nail to preserve the system of unequal rights. There's a programmatic component, too. As the workers deserve more program notes, relying on the Democrats to defeat the Republicans isn't working. An independent political party rooted in the working class majority is necessary to build a future free from exploitation and oppression. Without a party, I argue, we have nothing. The demand for a democratic republic creates a point of unity, a minimum demand around which socialists of all persuasions can rally behind in the name of creating a favorable political playing field and bringing much-needed light and air to our movement. The alternative. Newsom's gerrymandering scheme is a race to the bottom. Endorsing it spoils a chance to argue for a nationwide system of proportional representation and brings us no closer to resolving the issue of political independence from the Democratic Party. One tendency within DSA, represented by Cawthorn and Company, struggles to imagine challenging the whole Constitution. It ignores the issue by working within the Democratic Party's orbit to finagle the rules and elect better people to high positions. Another tendency, represented by Andrew and Ian, also doesn't know what to do with our obstructionist and immovable political system. It too ignores the issue, choosing instead to shun the language of equality and democracy and demand full communism. Both tendencies attempt to hide the crippling flaw in their respective strategies, the rejection of democratic republicanism, behind empty slogans like collective power and socialist politics. Instead of endorsing Prop 50, we should seize the opportunity to advocate for proportional representation and a new constitution. Chapters can host public discussions and political education night schools, as East Bay DSA did in 2024 with its two-part event on the Constitution. Members can also advance resolutions, as San Diego DSA did with its For a Democratic Constitution resolution last year. Signs should be made, and T-shirts should be printed. Following YDSA's Winning the Battle for Democracy resolution, elected officials should be encouraged to stand as tribunes for democracy. We demand our electeds be socialists, but they must also champion proportional representation and constitutional change. Because single-member districts are federally mandated, none of this advocacy can be restricted to California. DSA must lead a nationwide campaign for proportional representation and a democratic constitution. Ultimately, the direction of DSA and the American left more broadly will be determined by both debate and action. Discussion has its place. Lenin's What is to be Done, a book-length polemic against other social democrats, lies at the heart of the critique I've presented in this article. But while Lenin tried to win people over to his ideas, he also pursued an independent path of action to build a movement for democracy. Marxist Unity Group members are already convinced Democratic Republicans. The best response to Prop 50, and to the broader tendencies we've observed in DSA, is to continue winning people to our ideas and increase our democratic agitation. Let's lead by example and fill Light and Air and the Monthly Bulletin, two growing, indispensable projects, with sharp, fearless arguments for democracy. When it comes to indicting the Democratic Party and connecting every social abuse to the need for a new political system, no opportunity should be wasted. The American left is slowly, oh so slowly, returning to socialism's democratic Republican roots and everything that entails. Let's use this moment to assert what Marxist Unity Group stands for and connect with others who agree. That concludes the article, Proposition 50, A Race to the Bottom. I should note that, of course, this article was written before Proposition 50 passed, and passed by a good deal. Of course, the analysis put forward here still matters, and I argue will continue to matter, especially as we approach the midterms in the middle of 2026. I expect that the Democratic Party will continue running on this position of defending America from Trump, defending democracy, defending the Constitution, so on and so forth. This is going to be the line that the Democratic Party runs against the Republicans for the foreseeable future, just as it was for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and so on and so forth. And the analysis still stands. We cannot let the Democratic Party own that idea of being the defenders of democracy. As I've argued and written several times, the Democratic Party is Democratic in name only. I'm hoping to facilitate a conversation in East Bay DSA about proportional representation, gerrymandering, and perhaps also about Proposition 50. I noted that most California DSA chapters supported Proposition 50, and that's very true. East Bay DSA actually didn't take a stand of any kind, and in San Francisco, I believe they also did not take a stand of any kind. The pushback there was perhaps stronger than it was in East Bay DSA. The conversation hasn't been had out in the open. Many of the people, I should say, at least a few of the folks who I was quoting here in support of Proposition 50 are in East Bay DSA, and I believe at least some of the folks who spoke out against it are in San Francisco DSA. So this is a very local issue, if you will. I'm here in Berkeley, California. And in the run-up to the midterm elections, I expect we'll hear Newsom touting Proposition 50 and how the Democratic Party is using gerrymandering in order to fight back against the Republicans, so on and so forth. We'll see how the midterms turn out, of course. And obviously, even if the Democrats were to win the House in 2026, that would not stop the increasing authoritarian right-wing movement that we see. The idea that somehow winning the House, even if it were possible, is going to stop all the bad things that are coming our way and are happening is frankly laughable. But as I said, the most distressing bit of all this for me is that now continues to be, and certainly it was prior, a really great opportunity for the left to double down on its democratic message. People were especially attuned to gerrymandering and the flaws in our political system. They still are, of course. I'm recording this right after the government shutdown ended, so people are talking about the Senate, and many people are very frustrated with the Democratic Party. The opportunities, of course, still remain. But the left, as I argued, needs to use the opportunities that we are given in order to agitate for a democratic political system. And all of the hubbub around gerrymandering is exactly that opportunity. So, thanks for listening to another audio article, and this is certainly not going to be the last of the conversation around gerrymandering and the need for proportional representation and ultimately a democratic constitution.